This is Dr. Stephanie Wautier, and I'm the host of Conversations with a Chiropractor. This is not a health how-to, but rather a conversation with some amazing people I've had the pleasure of being with on my journey of life. Think of it more like Tuesdays with Maury, a fireside chat, or chicken soup for the soul. Grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and enjoy this conversation with a chiropractor. Thank you both so much for agreeing to be on this podcast.
You're welcome.
So just started, and I think it's always a good place to start. Gary, will you tell me when you were born and where you were born?
I was born on May 24th, 1943 in Brussels.
In
Wisconsin.
Brussels, Wisconsin.
Yeah.
Which is a really strongly populated Belgian population, right?
Yes.
In fact, I was telling someone that the cemetery there at that little Catholic church is like 80% Wautiers.
Yes, there's quite a few.
Now, I know that there's 2 people not buried there, but to your knowledge, are most of the American descendant Wautiers buried there?
I would say most.
Most of them?
Yes.
And Holly, when were you born and where were you born?
I was born July 7th, 1952 in Green Bay, Wisconsin.
In Green Bay. Mm-hmm. But you grew up mostly in what community?
It was called Duck Creek then. Now it's called Village of Howard. It's a suburb of Green Bay.
Okay. And you guys met and got married, and I know you didn't meet and get married in the same year, but remind me what year you were married.
1977.
Okay, 1977. You're coming up on what anniversary? Help me with the math.
In May, it was our 47th.
3 years till the big 5-0.
Yeah.
That's a milestone anniversary.
We're looking forward to it.
Give our listeners some marital advice. What is the secret to a long, happy, healthy marriage?
I think number one is to put God first in your life. I think that's the most important thing.
It sounds like that is what both of you would say is the most important thing.
Yes, that's exactly what I was going to say.
Mm-hmm. Go ahead, Gare.
Keep the Lord first in your marriage.
And each other second.
Mm-hmm.
Have there been times that you guys have needed to forgive the other for something?
Oh, gosh.
Yes.
Never? Neither of you ever did anything wrong that the other would have to forgive?
Not that I can remember. That's the key.
That's the key. You know, it's funny. So,
Forgive.
Yeah.
And forget.
Right.
That's the big thing. Don't hold grudges or things.
Love keeps no record of wrongs.
Exactly.
I used to say whenever someone would get married, I would put in their card, remember to forgive your spouse every day. That's one of the main keys, not to keep a record of wrongs. Mm-hmm. Recently, I've been thinking, besides putting God first, the reason people stay married is because they decide to stay married, right? They're like, I made the decision, we're staying together because it's so easy.
Especially in today's age, it's so easy to just, I don't want to do this anymore, and let's move on to something else.
Like, oh, I got married, it was a mistake, and we'll find something better, different. You guys are both from the Midwest, the Green Bay area. Brussels is in southern Door County. Mm-hmm. Gary, I want to jump a little bit about your ancestors and your upbringing. Was your home very strongly in a Belgian tradition?
As far as I know, my grandfather spoke Belgian a lot to my dad. And when he was yelling at me, I had to learn Belgian because I didn't know what he was saying. And when we lived on the farm, my grandparents lived on the farm too.
They did.
Yes.
And that was very culturally appropriate. That's what families did. Multi-generational families.
My grandfather was actually born in Brussels, but his dad and his grandfather came over from Belgium.
Did they come over on a boat?
My grandfather was actually born in Brussels.
In the United States?
Yes.
Okay. Brussels, Wisconsin.
Yes.
What kind of farming was done on that farm?
It was dairy farm, but back in those days, we did everything. We had cows, pigs, chickens, everything.
Family to eat?
And I think I can remember that when I was small, they had these big horses. And I think he would raise horses for other farmers to do farming. I remember my dad placed me on a horse's back and my legs sticking out, and I couldn't even reach the edges. That's how big. So it might have been the...
Is it the Clydesdales?
Belgians.
Belgian. I think that's how they started, even before the cows.
Really?
It was more of a raising horses, but it converted to cows. And
For milking?
dairy.
Did you have vegetables too, like a big
Oh, yeah.
vegetable garden?
Everything.
Like living
Vegetables.
off the land?
Vegetables, fruit, grapevines, raspberry bushes, apple trees, pear trees, everything. You lived off the land.
And how many brothers and sisters do you have?
7.
Was it pretty typical to have a big farming Catholic family?
Back then, yes.
Back then,
oh, yes.
yeah.
Everybody had, 7, 8 kids. Whatever, but smart farms.
And that you were raised Catholic?
Yes.
And I don't know the answer to this. Was that traditional in Belgium? Catholicism?
I know they had these little chapels on the side of the roads, in the country roads, with the Virgin Mary statues and different things. And if you needed prayer, you would go in and pray in those little rooms. Other than
In the
regular
country,
church, like in
that's
Wisconsin.
Interesting. And Holly, you were raised Catholic as well?
Yes.
Okay. But your upbringing was different. How the village of Howard was more a city.
It was more a village because it was a lot smaller than Green Bay, but it was just real close to Green Bay. It was still just a little village. They had a volunteer fire department, and my dad volunteered for the fire department.
What was your dad's main job?
He was a steam fitter.
Oh. Pipe and steam fitter?
He worked for a heating company
Okay.
in Green Bay, and he did that his entire life. My folks started out in Manitowoc, and my dad built submarines
Really?
in Manitowoc.
Is that submarine company still around?
I don't think so.
No.
No.
Like submarines for the military?
Mm-hmm.
Wow.
Especially during the war. That's when he was there.
Okay.
And then I think in 1950, my dad got a job in Green Bay, and they moved to Green Bay.
From Manitowoc? Okay. Did your mom work outside the home?
Yes, she was a waitress. She worked at a supper club when I was little to save her tips so that they could buy some land and build a home.
Mm-hmm.
And she did that. And by the time I was 4, they had their house built, and we moved in
Howard.
in Howard.
Okay. And you're the youngest of 4?
No, I'm the third of 4.
You're the third of 4. Okay. You have a younger brother.
An older sister, an older brother, and then a younger brother.
I know Gary probably worked on the farm growing up. Your whole family probably worked the farm, right? Did your mom or dad have an outside of the farm job?
Yeah, during the winter months, my dad worked at the shipyards.
Oh, he
in
did?
Sturgeon Bay. I forget the type of boats. They made boats so that the submarine mines couldn't blow them up. The hull of the boat was wooden. Yeah, it was kind of interesting.
That is interesting.
What he did during the winter months, just did chores, and then a lot of the farmers would go work at the shipyard.
I suppose just to survive.
Extra money, and there wasn't that much work. He didn't work in the fields during the winter.
Yeah. It's interesting when I think about people that are farming, how reliant they are. What is the weather going to do, right? Will there be enough snow? Will there be enough sun? You're so reliant on whatever the weather's going to do. Now, did you go into the military straight out of high school?
No, I did, I think, a semester or so at a vocational type school. I can't remember the name of it, but for accounting. And, of course, my parents didn't have a lot of money to send you to college, so that wasn't even a thought. So after the first semester, like in February, I graduated in May. By February, I enlisted in the Air Force.
Okay. So you did get some sort of certificate or degree at that vocational school?
I didn't finish the whole year. I was only there one semester.
Okay.
Yeah.
What branch of the service were you in?
I was in the Air Force.
Air Force? What was your job in the Air Force?
Talk about that.
You can't talk about that. Or were you
Actually-
sworn to secrecy?
Actually, I was considered intelligence. We needed a top secret crypto clearance because the work we did was classified.
Okay.
Part of my job was intercepting Morse code, and the only place I could work was overseas. So that's where I went after school.
I know we've talked about this a little bit, but you were in Turkey.
That was the last tour.
That was the last tour.
I happened that I could do this work. It came to me rather easy, and I was ahead of my class. We went to class down in Biloxi, Mississippi, and I was ahead of the class, so that was the big thing all the way through. It was about 9 months worth of study. The head of the class could pick the country they wanted to work to.
Wow.
They wanted to send me to the east, Far East, and I said, I'd like to go to Germany because I was ahead of my class. And by golly, they came through, and that's where I was sent. It was supposed to be for a few years, but then they needed experienced people in Turkey, in that area, and that's where I ended up.
What was the political climate when you were in the service? What was happening? What years were you in?
1962 is when I went in.
So right at the beginning of the Vietnam.
Yeah. And it was progressing, and by 66 is when I got out. That's one of the reasons I got out, because of Turkey. Care for the remote site. Because of the classification of the job that we did, we really didn't work on an Air Force base. When I was in Germany, I was actually on an Army base. We had a little section of the people that did the same types of work. I had a roommate that intercepted Russian, and one intercepted Polish. And we all worked in the same place, gathering information.
Okay. And you were interpreting Morse code.
I intercepted it.
Intercepted it.
Yeah, you listen to different people.
Like different radio signals, radio frequencies.
The big radios, and after experience, you could tell by the way they sent Morse code, it was you could understand and relate to who it was that was sending, even though it was basically enemy.
Yeah.
Because they always changed their name, their codes, and everything was jumbled up. So you never knew what station or who it was or where they were. But an experienced operator could listen to it, and the way his accent was, the way he was sending, I could say, oh, this is Joe Blow, and here's where he's at.
Wow.
Tremendous amount of intelligence could gather from that. Because it was not only grown people, but it was also aircraft and all different things. Back then in the 60s, they used Morse code a lot.
I can imagine. And then like radio was probably the primary way of them communicating with each other.
Exactly. And of course, many times they knew what we were doing.
They knew you were listening.
So they would have a lot of scratching and interference and different things to try to keep us from hearing them.
Hearing clearly.
Or they do weird things, screeching and all different weird things. But an experienced operator would know that, and you could copy it. In Germany, I was on an army base. And at one time, it was a German military facility, because even on the base, we had tunnels going from one room to the other, or one building to another. Then a civilian bus would come and pick us up and take us to our hideout, if you want to call it, in the middle of the woods somewhere.
Wow.
None of the people on the base knew what we were. We were weird to everybody else on the base because we weren't even Army.
And you probably couldn't talk about what you were doing.
No, but there was pretty strict rules about that.
Did people back home know what you were doing?
No. They wondered about, when I was going through school, is we had to have a top secret crypto clearance. So the FBI was calling on different people and federal agents wherever I lived, whatever I did, they wanted to know about me. A lot of the guys didn't make it through school because they couldn't pass the background check.
You were a farm boy from Wisconsin?
I went in for accounting, and I ended up more copying code and interpreting.
And like, to be doing such an important, highly classified, I would hope then and now that you feel really proud of that.
I felt like I did something for the country. The last part, being sent to Turkey, they apologized, but they said, we need somebody that knows what they're doing. And it was a very small base, and it wasn't an Air Force base. It was actually a NATO base. We were protected by the Turkish army. We had just a little section, and at one time, we worked 24 hours a day, but for the people that did what I did, there was only 2 of us working at one time.
Wow.
We were right on the Black Sea in a town called Samsun in the middle of Turkey. Wasn't a real nice place to live for 15 months.
Was it cold?
In winter, it was very cold. The wind would come over the Black Sea from Russia. We were issued big winter parkas like they do in Alaska. That's how cold it got.
Wow.
And where we lived, the little metal barracks that we were in, we'd have to take a truck to move up to the hills where the actual facility was.
What would you eat?
They had a chow hall. We had just regular food. They had a little NCO club. It was run by 2 German cooks and a Turkish cook. And he was like the manager because they had Turkish employees. See, this is in the non-restrictive area.
Okay.
Where we were living was completely
Undercover.
Yeah, it was fenced-in community. And this is where you spent most of the time. We had it was a gymnasium that also served. The gymnasium was actually just a metal building that we had lifted weights and did stuff like that. It also served as our theater. We put up a screen and showed, just like on MASH, you showed pictures on the screen.
Like every Friday or something?
That was periodically. And it was so cold during the winter, we'd have to wear our big parkas. And we had a little speaker in the front for the noise, for the people talking.
In the gymnasium?
In the gymnasium, we put a speaker up so we could hear the movie.
Oh my gosh.
But the trouble is, when the furnace went, you couldn't hear the music. So everybody'd say, shut it off. And we'd sit there with our coats bunged so we could hear it a bit.
Oh my gosh.
So it was quite different.
So that was not fun. You did not enjoy that time. No. But when you were in Germany, you did get to do some excursions, some traveling throughout Europe?
Quite a bit. We worked 24 hours a day, so it was a 6-day shift. So you'd work 6 days at one shift, and then you have a day off and do another 6. Then you do another 6, and then the third shift, you'd have 6 days off. So you could travel quite a bit around Europe. And at that time, I also joined an archery team. It wasn't actually an Air Force, but it was more like a local base type thing. The guys that did the jobs that I did, we would go around shooting competition around Europe.
Amazing.
On our 6 days off.
That's so cool.
One year we had, in Bad Tolz, Germany, a European championship shoot, which was fun.
Wow.
There was English, Italians, all over. They were there for a 3-day shoot, and we were able to go and participate, and it was fun.
How cool to be with that elite crowd of archery.
Yeah, it was interesting.
I know the story that you went skiing in Austria.
Yes, I went to Innsbruck, went to the Alps and did skiing. I didn't know how to ski, so I lasted one trip down the bunny hill and crashed at the bottom, and I went and sat in the clubhouse and watched. Beautiful, beautiful country. It's just beautiful.
I can only imagine. Yeah. And you went to London, Paris.
London, mostly just in transport. That was another thing, is because of our classification, we flew commercial airlines, and we didn't wear uniforms.
You were undercover.
Yeah. In fact, when I decided to get out of... In Turkey, they wanted you to stay in again, because by now we were pretty experienced. And the only place that I could work in the Air Force was overseas. If I did 25 years, I figured I'd have at least 3 remote sites. There was a remote Alaska. This was considered a remote site in Turkey.
Okay.
I said, I don't want to go through this 3 more times. Plus, you didn't have really a family life.
No.
You couldn't even... One of the fellows started dating a German girl. He lost his classification. He was sent out. You couldn't have any relationship with the country because of our classification.
Oh.
They didn't know who would be dating or anything. So it was... You were very isolated from a lot of things.
Forced isolation.
Yeah. So in Turkey, when they found out that, I said, I can't take this anymore, and then and so then one of the officers come in, and I was offered I could have worked for NSA doing the same type of work, but then I wouldn't have the protection of being in a military facility. I'd be as a civilian. I'd make a lot more money, but it would be a lot more dangerous.
But you chose not to take that position. When you were done with Turkey, you went back to the United States?
Yes.
Okay. And started your journey to become an accountant.
Yes.
That started in Turkey, didn't it?
When I was in Turkey, there was nothing to do. Some of the guys, we had a little bar, restaurant type thing. That's where the German cooks came out. Some of the guys did a lot of drinking, and I didn't want to do that. They needed somebody to keep the books. We did have a manager, and we were under the European control of the financial statements. But I knew the fellow that was doing the accounting for them. And when he was transferred out, I was offered a position. So that's what I did.
Wow. On the side.
On the side. But a lot of nights I'd be there working, but there was nothing else to do anyway.
It's
better than the alternatives like some of the guys did.
And so you really had a love for numbers, a love for...
Oh, yeah. I went into the Air Force for accounting. In fact, I just about aced the test, and the recruiter said, oh, yeah, you'll be in accounting. Little did I know that when I was in basic training, they give you these different tests. And what I ended up in was what they call a critical field. A lot of guys couldn't do it. You had to be able to type 60 words a minute. I would copy 5 characters a second.
Wow.
And they weren't like A and D.
Yeah.
They were characters or numbers, and you'd have to be able to copy 5 of those a second. A lot of guys couldn't do it. Plus, they wouldn't pass the background.
Yeah, the background check.
One of the fellows that was a roommate, when they first started out, is very basic. You don't get into anything secretive until you're actually on the job.
Oh.
We knew a basic thing, but not the details. Well, he was from Brooklyn, and he used to tell me about the gang fights, drive-by shootings. Needless to say, he didn't pass the classification.
And this was in the 19...
62.
Wow.
Probably when I was...
In Brooklyn, it was rough even then,
Yes,
right?
yes.
Wow.
But so that's why it was considered a critical field. One day we marched to this building, and so we're going to give you guys a test. It happened to be Morse code. I said, I don't want Morse code. When they would play this tune, they go, da, that's an A. Da, diddy, dit, that's a B. I would wait, and then I'd just put one down. I didn't know the way they were scoring it is not how many answers were right. So most of my answers were right, but not many. I still, you're not going to be in accounting. this is a critical field. You have no choice. That's right there.
They needed you.
Yeah.
So you must have some sort of like inborn or genetic instinctive gift with that. I would think that Morse code is like numerical, right? There has to be some sort of similarity between that.
Something.
Now, you're also musical, though, right? You also play the guitar.
Mm-hmm.
And when did you learn that?
When I was in the service, I think it was Germany, one of my roommates was playing. He was from the down south. And he'd be playing away, and I said, oh, that's pretty cool. And here, I'll show you how to do it. That type of thing. I really pretty much self-taught.
Okay. And you played the piano?
I took piano lessons.
A little bit of piano lessons, learning the guitar in the service. Do you also sing?
I did at church for about 20-some years. I led the praise and worship.
That's amazing. Are you musical at all?
I like to sing. I do like to sing.
Did you grow up singing?
Yes. I love being on a swing set and just singing my heart out in the backyard.
Did you sing at church growing up?
I was in the church choir when I was in grade school. I went to a Catholic grade school for 8 years. 7th and 8th grade, I was in the choir, maybe even 6th. I don't really remember.
Either of you, were there like music classes in high school?
I had started playing the clarinet when I was in 6th grade. And then when I got to high school, I just continued with the band instead of...
What's funny, I played flute in middle school, and I also sang, but I dropped the flute for high school because I was like, I want to do choir instead. Because it's hard to do both.
I don't think they allow you to... When I went, they didn't allow you. You had to pick one or the other.
Really? Interesting. Yeah. So you played the clarinet all the way through?
High school, I went to alto clarinet and played for 4 years there and did the marching band stuff. So it was a lot of fun. We even did some Packer half times.
Good. Amazing. Now, just from what we think about the movie Grease, a lot of people have seen that. I don't know what era, like what time frame it was even supposed to be set in, but would you as a band person been considered like a geek or a nerd? Or was that like a thing? You know, you think about those stereotypes.
No, I don't think so.
We did cheerleading.
Yeah, I was a cheerleader in high school, too.
Was there a connotation that a cheerleader would have been the more popular girl or the pretty girls?
I don't think so.
I think you guys are just being very humble. And you're not saying, yes, I was beautiful and popular, and I played the clarinet, but I was also a cheerleader.
Yeah. No, I guess I never thought of myself that way.
Holly, what did you do after high school? Did you work, pursue any kind of schooling?
No schooling, but I did work for a number of years until Gary and I got married. I worked for a little while after we were married, and then I quit.
Right this minute, my kids are a junior and senior in high school, and I feel like we as parents are like, what are you going to do with your life? When I was in high school, it was mandatory that people went to college. My parents didn't help me financially at all, maybe a teeny tiny bit that first year, but I was one of 5. We didn't have money. There was no college fund. Tell me a little bit about what it was like for you both in the time that you were like graduating from high school and the time that you were thinking about the next decision. My very first podcast guest, Bertha, who is going to be 99 here in about 6 weeks, it wasn't even expected that they would go off into the world. They finished high school and then they helped on the farm. There was no anticipation that they would leave, that they would figure out what they were going to quote unquote do for the rest of their lives. And I feel like fast forward now, there's a huge expectation that a child will not only figure out what they want to do, go to college and or find some sort of like vocational and or go into the service. Like, I feel like there's so much more pressure. Tell me if you guys can think back, what was it like for you both when you were in that phase? So maybe like Bertha, people in your generation, they weren't really forced, get out of the house or go to college. It was like whatever.
I think it was, the main thing was to get a job, doing something, to get a job.
To be able to support yourself, like to be, I don't know, self-supportive. And Gary, your parents didn't really push you to take the farm over?
No, not at all. I never had a desire to continue. Although, even in my high school years, my dad depended on me because of my age or whatever. I know a lot of the field work. He'd ask me, do you think we need to cut that field or whatever? And I just go out and do it. And I even, on one occasion, in fact, a couple occasions, he had me go over to a neighbor because he didn't have somebody to help him with driving his tractor on the machinery and stuff. But he never pushed me to stay or anything like that. Didn't expect you to go to college, I don't think. I think he expected you to figure it out. And I knew I liked accounting because even in high school, one of the classes I was situationally, if there's a word, was a bookkeeping class. I loved the heck out of it. Getting the debits and the credits to work out. And that's why I went into the vocational school for that. And aced the test there. It just came real easy for me. And that was an easy transition to the Air Force because I was guaranteed that's what I was going to do.
Until they needed you more in a different area.
Until he aced the typing class.
But even when I was in Turkey, beside doing the accounting at the little restaurant, like they call it an NCO club in a remote facility, even then I was taking correspondence courses it was out of Chicago. It was a correspondence accounting course. It's supposed to be equivalent to a master's degree by the time you get out.
Interesting.
I'd fill out the work and the questions and mail it to them. They'd grade it and send it back in the next lesson. I did that. I went through, I think, a 3 or 4 year course, and I was able to finish it in the 15 months I was in Turkey. It just came to me naturally.
That's so cool to hear.
So that's why when I got out, that's the field I went in.
Because you already had all of that really education and experience.
Yes.
That's an interesting thing to think about now, how there's so much online school and people can do this online. But for you to have a correspondence course where you were physically mailed the book and then you mailed it back.
Mailed the lessons back, yeah. There was what do they call it? Skype.
Skype,
Zoom,
yeah.
or Zoom,
no
whatever.
Zoom, no Skype.
There was no internet back then, actually.
No. In fact, when I was in college, the World Wide Web was just beginning. And now my kids can jump on their phone and Google or Safari and find an answer to any question in a split second.
Yeah.
Did you get a lot of mail when you were overseas?
No. My mother would write once in a while, maybe every couple of months or whatever. And I know I didn't write much either. In fact, I had one of the officers, anyway, somebody came and complained, your parents want to know if you're still alive.
Oh my God.
Yeah, it was very little correspondence whatsoever.
Holly, did you have any friends or family that were in the service during the Vietnam era?
Wasn't Glenn?
Glenn was in the Navy.
Is Glenn your brother?
My older brother. But I don't think he ever went overseas.
He didn't.
No. I think he was mainly stationed on the East Coast of the United States.
Okay. It's interesting. My dad, I don't know if he was drafted or if he went to enlist, but he had horrible eczema on his hands and feet, and he didn't pass the physical because of that. He used to talk about his mom putting whatever salve and wrapping his hands and feet in cotton and, just really bad.
That is horrible.
Eczema. Is there anything else that you would like to tell our listeners, whether young or old, about anything about life, anything about your growing up times or lessons you've learned?
I know that being married to this man has been the best thing I've ever done. Yeah, 47 years, and I do it again.
I think the most important thing that could happen to anybody is their relationship with the Lord. That'll change life completely. And I think when that happened, that was the biggest thing that ever happened in my life. One of the reasons we went out, my thought was, I'd like to lead her to the Lord. She needs to know Jesus.
Yeah.
Yeah, and she did accept the Lord very shortly after that. To me, that's the most important thing. These other things are not important at all.
Yeah.
Your relationship with the Lord means everything.
Because everything else passes away, right?
Exactly.
Like dust.
Exactly.
All of our belongings, all of our things, the granite countertops,
Nothing.
the Swarovski crystals, all of the things that we enjoy, these pretty things.
And that happened for me. It
yeah.
happened for me in 1972
Okay.
when I accepted the Lord.
So you were back home from being in the service.
Back home from being in the service, I lived in Illinois for maybe 8 years due to domestic problems and situations. I was back in Green Bay and was confronted by an individual that said, I can tell you how to solve some of those problems. Come to church. I went, heard a message, and I accepted the Lord right then.
Wow. In that very first.
And was baptized not too many months later and been following the Lord to the best of my abilities ever since.
And I think a lot of people are curious when we talk about the difference between knowing the Lord as your Savior versus being in church. I'm a Catholic, I go to church, or I'm a Lutheran, I go to church. How would you describe that experience that you had or that you went through?
It's a personal relationship. I was an altar boy until I graduated from high school. Raised as a Catholic. My parents went every Sunday. But you never had that personal relationship. You knew there was a God. You knew that Jesus came to earth to save our souls from sins, died on the cross for us. And you knew that, but it was never a personal relationship. But when you experience an actual relationship with the Lord, everything changes. All of a sudden, things that were important to you aren't anymore, and things that weren't are. It's a personal relationship, and that you have that relationship with God. That's the only way. Once you experience that, is you don't go back. Your life changes.
Absolutely.
That's the best I can explain it.
Yeah.
Good job.
And how cool, too, that you guys probably at the very beginning of your relationship, like, grew together, right? If you were newly saved, born again.
Yeah, I accepted the Lord at a Thursday night service that Gary brought me to, December 9th, 1976. we've been
It was probably our second date, huh? I took her.
pretty close. Yeah.
Close. And then when you
close.
left, what did you say? I hope I don't have to go back.
So meeting Gary, and I knew the circumstances he was going through. And he was always so happy, and we always had such a great time. I thought, I want what he has. He said it was because of his relationship with the Lord. I thought, I want that relationship too. So I accepted the Lord as my personal Lord and Savior. Best thing I ever did. And then I married this guy.
And 3 years to your 50th wedding anniversary.
Yes.
Thank you both so much for taking a little moment and having this conversation with me today. I think our listeners are really going to enjoy this.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, would you please rate it, review it, like, or subscribe? You can find me on social media at wautierwellness.com, Dr. Stephanie Wautier on Instagram, or Wautier Wellness Chiropractic and Massage on Facebook. And I'm so curious where your next conversation will take you.